A current can ultimately be described as the flow of an electrical charge, something occurring in the present, or the movement of water or air. A current is also defined by direction, either a natural pathway or course, or one initiated to achieve an end. The distinctive nature, the beauty of American society and culture is that it is best defined as a vast ocean of diverse currents, a sea of dissimilar demographics, different ethnicities, different mores, different faiths, different values, all most often first associated with the visible genetic composition of pigment, color, found in a person's skin, hair, eyes. Yet, despite the current that defines each of our own individual paths, we endeavor to exist as a single nation, albeit too often haphazardly. I'm Terrence Afer-Anderson. Welcome to the pilot edition of Currents, a new current affairs and news program that gives voice to a Hampton Roads, Virginia perspective on national, political, social, economic, and environmental news, how it impacts us locally, and how we navigate it. On this pilot edition of Currents, the topic is voting, the history of voting in America, the importance of voting, how redistricting impacts voting, and ranked choice voting. As we delve deep into the essential issue, I have assembled a distinctive group of panelists for our discussion. They include Betty Williams-Potts of the Norfolk City Democratic Committee. She also serves as the voter protection liaison for the Democratic Party of Virginia. Additionally, she is an impassioned advocate for the restoration of voting rights for convicted Virginia felons. That makes for a perfect segue to my next guest, Norfolk Commonwealth Attorney Ramin Fatehi, a progressive prosecutor committed to criminal justice reform. He has led the charge in Norfolk to decriminalize and legalize marijuana possession, to abolish cash bail, to abolish the jury trial penalty, to make the justice system honor the principle that Black lives matter. I'm also pleased to welcome Annette Pete Kelly, a retired security specialist with the United States Coast Guard Homeland Security. Currently, she serves as the second vice president of the Chesapeake Democratic Women and serves as well as their scholarship chair. She is also the parliamentarian of the Chesapeake Democratic Committee. We're also joined by Gary McCullum of Virginia Beach, a former U.S. Army intelligence officer and Army Ranger. He has also served on numerous boards and commissions, to include the Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the Hampton Roads Chamber of Commerce, the Hampton Roads Partnership, and the Hampton Roads Economic Development Alliance. Well, guys, again, I want to thank you so very much for joining us for this pilot edition of Currents. Let's get right into it, honestly, because the November 8th is a critically important day, and people feel all different kinds of ways about voting. And I remember as a kid, I remember seeing news footage of people demonstrating for the right to vote. Do any of you recall ever seeing any news footage like that, or that some of you, probably your parents, would have to tell you about those kind of things? But you remember that. What do you recall about that? How did that make you feel? I'm just that to you.
Yeah. Well, that was before my time, but I heard the stories and the feeling of just a struggle, people struggling to have a basic right, just didn't make sense to me. Mm-hmm. And to feel it and see it in my time, I couldn't understand it. And to see it still bearing its face today is just mind-blowing. So, yes.
Those were very startling images for me to see as a little kid. What about news footage? Some of you have seen archival footage of those type of things. Any comments?
I think for me, when I look at that footage, but I also have the advantage that I live in a multi-generational household. My father-in-law is 91. He was born in 1931. And when I talk to him and talk about how he grew up and what he faced, being a Korean War officer, African-American officer in the Korean War, and what he went through, I think that gives me strength to do what I do in the community, because this effort, this work that we have to do, it continues. And people always ask, well, what would I have done if I had lived in the 60s, or if I had lived in the 50s, or even in the 40s? Well, what are you doing right now? because that's what you would have did in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. If you're doing nothing now, that's what you would have did then.
Absolutely.
We're
Because the fight continues even right now. The struggle continues right now.
we're a block away from a Woolworth store that used to be across the street from where the entrance to MacArthur Mall is. And I remember my mom participated in a sit-in and, at that particular Woolworth. And it was interesting to see my father's reaction on to see this on the news. You know, he just sat there and beamed. You know, he really truly did, and that was a critically important memory for me. Ramin, and any memories from?
Terrence, I remember the Woolworths very well, but I want to say I remember I'm a child of the 50s, and growing up, and in history class, they would tell us and teach us about poll taxes that people of color would have to pay in order to be able to vote. And even as a child, I thought that was so unfair. And now I'm seeing the voter suppression of today. And it really makes me angry that this has happened.
One of the things I remember is people having to count jelly beans in a jar. Absolutely insane. Ramin, have you heard about those kind of things? What are your thoughts?
I'm fortunate that I was young enough not to live through those times, but I was a history major in college, and to learn about and there was even growing up here in Hampton Roads in the 1980s and 90s, there was a sort of silence in schools, very reminiscent of what the governor wants to bring back today, and a willful forgetting even from the children of the people who defended the poll tax and lost in court about how fragile and frankly how fresh civil rights were then. And it's both unthinkable and chilling to watch the civil rights protesters and marchers being beaten and hosed down in the streets and having dogs sicked on them. It became really even more resonant for me, though, as we've seen sort of the 150th anniversary of a lot of the events of Reconstruction being written about again. Because there was a period after the Civil War, after the passage of the Civil Rights Amendments, where black voting power was real, where black elected officials were in the Congress, were in the Senate, were governors, and then all of it was stamped out and the memory of that erased to the point where people had to start over again in the 60s.
So we were talking about the type of voting rights demonstrations and activities that took place during the 60s. But protests and demonstration could take different forms. It could be manifested in activism, you know, and I'm curious as to what kind of things you guys might be doing now as activists to look towards equal access to voting and some of the restrictions that are indeed coming back.
Well, one of the things I do is I try to educate voters, and I've been working precincts for over 20 years now, and nothing gives me more pride than to see our seniors in their 80s and 90s who refuse to, even though we have easy access to voting now, but they still choose not to do absentee. They take pride in walking up to ballot booth. And I've spoke with several seniors, and they just ask, why don't you do absentee voting? You don't have to stand in long lines. And it's, no, I don't care if I have to stand in this line all day. I'm going to cast my vote. We work too hard and struggle too long for me to sit at home. And they do it with dignity, but they do it to inspire younger people. And it just, it's amazing.
I think probably a lot of times they do it as well in tribute to all of those people that we were talking about earlier.
Yes.
I was just going to add, and I think, Betty, I think you're absolutely right. I think our older citizens, because they are closer to some of the challenges, they've either lived through or heard the stories of the challenges, I think they're more motivated to vote. I think the challenge for us, though, is how do we get this younger generation?
Absolutely.
How do we get the younger generation to see that you have to do this. You
That
have to
vote
be involved.
matters,
You
yeah.
cannot be silent. And I have this dialogue with young people all the time, and I hear this story. Well, I don't get involved in politics. And I said, well, look, if you don't like politics, then you don't like to eat, because politics is all about who eats or who doesn't eat. Now, if you don't want to eat, then don't vote. If you wonder why policies, why laws, why, things are done in a way where a lot of older people are protected, it's because people don't think you're going to vote. So
Gary,
that's really the issue. How do we get young people to see that
Their vote
their
matters.
life is directly impacted by their vote?
I was at the reproductive rights rally at Lafayette Park shortly after the Supreme Court started chipping away at some of our modern civil rights, and reproductive rights in particular.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, I found it chilling, because one of the organizers was speaking extremely eloquently about the importance of protecting reproductive rights, and then said, don't vote, don't bother to vote. That's not going to make a difference. What you need to do is engage in activism. And I was standing next to another person involved in politics, and we both, though we wanted to jump up and grab the mic and say, no, it is the exact opposite. You need to vote for dog catcher. You need to vote for
Yes.
everybody.
Yes.
Because if you don't vote, you don't have the right to complain. And second, you're going to be the meal instead of having a seat at the table.
Yeah. I mean, the
Let me
activism is
stop you for
important.
just 1 second, because we're going to take a quick break. But I want to get back to this topic, particularly what you brought up, Gary, in terms of how to get young people to vote. And I want to share an experience that I had with my youngest. We're going to see you guys on the other side of the break.
10 minutes? I'll be there. Right on time. J and K Style Grill.
Come by and see us. We have a perfect match for you.
Home of the original waffle burger and happiness.
Okay, guys, I want to pick up where we left off. And Gary, you were about to say something.
Yeah, this issue of young people, and remember what you talked about with regard to, is it activism or voting? It is both. I mean, our organization, the ministers, Do the Right Thing, another organization that I've co-founded, we marched down Atlantic Avenue in Virginia Beach to fight for a disparity study. We did that, but we also engaged in getting people out to vote. We also, tried to take action with regard to, judicial action to change the way we vote in Virginia Beach. So it's all of those things that you have to do. And I guess I'll just end it by saying this. We're citizens. That is the most important office you can hold in this country. All of us hold that office. We don't have to get elected to it. We're born into it. And so there's a responsibility, there's an accountability that comes with being a citizen. And it includes voting, it includes being active, it includes making sure that you hold elected officials accountable for what they're doing with regard to our democracy.
Let's kind of shift gears a bit now and talk about redistricting. Have any of you personally experienced redistricting, or you know anyone that has? And
I did.
Oh, go ahead.
Yes. Actually, I'm now in District 2 for the congressional district. I was in 4. In fact, all of my candidates for my state senator, my state delegate, and my congressman have all changed. And for me, it was for the good. I'm extremely excited. I don't know if I should say who they are, but
Not at this particular.
okay. So I won't.
Yeah. Any other
But-
thoughts on redistricting? Remain.
I'm one of the few elected officials fortunate enough that redistricting doesn't touch me. I represent the whole city of Norfolk. But I can tell you that as Commonwealth's attorney responsible for enforcing the criminal law and being equitable about it, I've had to pay a lot of attention both to the congressional level redistricting that's happened, for our once in 10 years this year, but also the redistricting in the House of Delegates and the Senate, Virginia House and Senate. So much of the day-to-day that we experience as Virginians happens either at City Hall or at the State House. And the moves that I'd like to see towards felon reenfranchisement in the law, which is a huge, it's still hangover from Jim Crow in the Virginia Constitution. The efforts at looking to rehabilitative solutions, those depend on who goes to Richmond. And the way that the districts have been drawn now mean that the way that I have to think about, okay, who's running? Who will I be talking to in a year? Who will my allies be? Who will be the choke points trying to stop these reforms? All of that was based on who was getting elected where. And watching those district lines get redrawn and then watching elected officials either have to run against each other, drop out, or new people emerge and have new constituencies is, even for me that I have to do it as part of my job, it's confusing. And I can't imagine how it works for the average citizen trying to figure out what all or who all is their representative and how they vote and where they vote.
Yeah, if I may, I would just say that I think redistricting can be beneficial because I do think that citizens should pick their representatives versus the representatives picking the people who they want to represent. I think that's the way democracy works. But being a citizen of Virginia Beach, I can say that we have a historic election that's about to take place in 20-some days. For the first time in the history of Virginia Beach, you have district-only voting. We, a number of us, ministers, other organizations, fought to make sure that this hybrid system where there was districts, but the votes were counted citywide, we saw that as being a way that certain communities, marginalized communities, African Americans, were frankly disenfranchised. And so we pushed for that in the legislature, we pushed for it in the courts, and we were successful. And so again, for the first time, there's going to be district-only voting, and we believe for the first time that there's an opportunity to truly get people elected who are going to represent the people and not necessarily moneyed interests.
So we have to take another break now, and when we do, I want to come back to what you were saying in terms of voting rights for felons, and I'm going to begin with you on that. So we're going to take a break now, and we'll see you guys on the other side of the break.
In 1856, Norfolk's richly diverse St. Patrick's Catholic Church was destroyed by fire. Miraculously, the only thing that survived was a larger-than-life wooden crucifix. St. Patrick's would be replaced by St. Mary's Catholic Church. When he was a 10-year-old slave boy, Mark DeMarty was purchased by Mary Lou Vest, a young free black woman. At age 18, he became a prolific conductor on the Norfolk branch of the Underground Railroad. Mary Lou Vest would become a Union spy during the Civil War, secreting plans for the conversion of the former USS Merrimack into the Confederate States ship Virginia, and in 1862, making a daring trip to Washington, D.C., presenting them to U.S. Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles. Mary Lou Vest was a member of both St. Patrick's and St. Mary's. No doubt Mark DeMarty attended St. Mary's as well. In 1991, Pope John Paul II dedicated St. Mary's as the Basilica of St. Mary of the Immaculate Conception, the only African-American basilica in the nation. Following a recent major renovation, the basilica discovered an underground tunnel that many believe played a role on the Underground Railroad. A cemetery was also discovered, with several of the remains exhumed, appearing to be of African descent. These incredible stories and more are told in the internationally multiple award-winning documentary, The Angels in the Details, coming to the Narrow Expanded Cinema on November 15th at 8 p.m. Get tickets at eventbrite.com. Tickets will also be available at the Narrow box office that evening.
Betty, Ramin mentioned voting rights for felons, and you're doing some work in terms of restoration of voting rights for Virginia felons. What can you
Yes.
tell us about
Yes. Well, I give credit to Senator Yvonne Miller, the late Yvonne Miller, who fought long and hard to make it easier for people who have paid their debt to society to return back to their communities and have their basic rights restored to vote. And it's been my pleasure to help people to get that right restored to vote. I've seen them be able to serve on jurors now and even run for office and be elected to office, as they should. So it's gone from being a 13-page application to one for nonviolent offenders, and for violent offenders, 2 pages. And I just believe that it's everyone's basic right to vote, and they shouldn't be penalized for the rest of their life just because they made a mistake in life.
I remember former Governor Terry McAuliffe was pretty much involved in that effort. He was
Yes.
doing some radical things there.
Yes.
You were going to say something in that?
No, it's just, well, actually, I have a family member that benefited from it, and he is now able to vote. He had, some minor charges, and he got his voting rights restored. And I feel like anybody who has served their time and they have finished out their parole and done their debt to society should be able to vote.
And I would just add, we know the stats, but per capita, we lock up more people in this country than probably any other country in the world. And so the fact that we say not only we're going to have you locked up, but then after you've done your time, you've paid your penance, now you can't vote, that just makes no sense. So I applaud everybody who's doing whatever they can to make sure that these rights are restored.
Before we run out of time, you were going to say something, man. Go right ahead.
This is one place where, as Commonwealth's attorney, I'm extremely passionate about this, because if you go back and you look at felon disenfranchisement, it wasn't a concept until Jim Crow. And the framers of the I'm going to get the date wrong, it's either 1904 or 1906 Constitution in Virginia. I'm not going to use the racial slur they did in the paper, but they said the point of the felon disenfranchisement clause in the new Constitution was to destroy the voting power of the black man. There is no public safety reason to take someone's right to vote away. The people should be able to vote no matter what their record is. And I say that from a public safety and a civil rights point of view. The more we do to alienate returning citizens from society, the more we make them feel like outlaws, the more likely they are to fall back into what got them in trouble in the first place. If we're serious about treating citizens as returning citizens, they should be able to vote no matter when and where.
Yes.
And this is where our local and state voting matters, because I tell my prosecutors, we hold people accountable. But we have to think very seriously when somebody is charged with a felony. Do they deserve to be convicted of the felony? Not just to call them felons, because when we do that, we destroy their civil rights.
Yes.
And do they deserve it? If they deserve it, we do it. If they don't deserve it, we don't just do it because we can prove the charges. There are other ways to hold people accountable. And it's absolutely essential that we not take away people's voting rights in the first place unless public safety and justice absolutely demand it.
Your commentary was a great punctuation mark for that topic, and I'm so glad that you contributed there. We don't have a whole lot of time left, and what I'd like to do is to talk very quickly about ranked choice voting, and that how would you describe ranked choice voting?
Well, ranked choice voting is where all of the political parties are kind of mixed together. They have Republican, Democrat, Independent, and you vote your choice 1, 2, 3. And how they do it is the one that gets the most votes is first, second, and third, they drop the one with the lowest votes. Then they go back and relook at the votes, and they, whoever they ranked as second, then they overtake whoever's in second place because more people may have voted for second, and then it goes to those two people to either run off or who the winner is. And that happened in New York very recently in the mayor's race.
And you have concerns about that, and
I'm not sure how I feel about it at the moment. I'd have to look at it more. I know it's been brought up for maybe Virginia.
right.
So I would really have to look more into it.
Gary, in just a few seconds, what are your thoughts?
I guess it really depends on what locality you're talking about, because I think a lot of it depends on the demographics, depends on the economics within that particular municipality. I can speak for Virginia Beach. I would not be in favor of ranked choice voting right now, because I think in that kind of system, you would continue to see the kinds of things that we've seen for generations, where moneyed interests would overtake everyone else, and you'd have a group of people who would continue to be marginalized. So in Virginia Beach's case, I would not advocate for that. But again, there's some municipalities where that may work.
Indeed.
I also have mixed feelings about it, Gary. My concern is, seniors who have been so used to voting, one way, for the person that they feel is the best candidate for them, to change is hard for a lot of people. So I'm just concerned about, educating the people on how that system will work and how it will look.
Well, guys, I want to thank you all so very much for joining us for this first edition, this pilot edition of Currents. And we are faithful, and we're hopeful that we're going to continue this incredibly important discussion. And we're going to be talking about a bunch of different issues. And don't be surprised if I invite you back onto the show. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Terrence.
I want to thank you for joining us for this pilot edition of Currents. Remember, the critical midterm elections are on Tuesday, November 8th. If you have voted already, good for you. But do know that my panel and I feel that each of us has an obligation to vote. Much blood has been spilled for you to exercise that right. That alone makes it an obligation. There's much to consider in these midterm elections. There's much to consider in every election. Your vote is your choice. You can speak, or you can remain silent. If you choose the latter, it is tantamount to submission. I'm Terrence Afer-Anderson, and this has been Currents.
Thank you.